All right. Hey, everyone. So far, when we've talked about supplementing our competitive strategies, a lot of the time what we find ourselves revolving around is this idea that how do we safeguard against others? How do we uh, go on the offensive against others? All of these kinds of things that are looking at, how do we vertically integrate? How do we outsource these kinds of things in order to give ourselves this leg up? Now, of course, this is what strategy is all about, but some of our competitive, like our supplementative options that are supposed to help our strategy out actually will require us to work with others. So in this little time, what we're going to talk about is this idea of what are some of the other strategic options that we have that will require us working with others in order to obtain the types of outcomes that we're looking for from our strategy. And the first conversation we definitely need to have is discuss about this idea of strategic alliance, right? So strategic alliance is basically just when we enter into some sort of formal agreement between ourselves and some other firm so that we can try to, create some sort of, let's say, like a mutual dependence or a shared control and shared risk distribution of resources, any of these kinds of things that all help both parties out, right? It allows us to provide greater value for our customers a lot of the time, and it can be a quick remedy to some of our key, deficiencies or weaknesses that we have as an organization. One example I like to always give here is Amazon and the U.S. Postal Service, right? For a while there, U.S. Postal Service went with a strategic alliance with Amazon in order to provide, the resources necessary for Amazon drivers to deliver on Sundays. At this point, I believe the fleet has now extended enough that Amazon doesn't utilize those services any longer. But while they were growing, it was a really quick, easy answer for Amazon's growth concern at that point to still continue to make products available on Sundays. How were they going to do that? They partnered with the USPS and offered that, right? It helped them kind of mitigate these challenges that they were having while growing. So a lot of times we just want to remember, collaborative relationships like this, they might entail some sort of contractual agreement. We may enter into a contract with somebody, but a lot of the times they'll commonly stop just short of formal ownership ties between either the partnerships. They remain remain strategically tied, but legal and entity wise, they're still two separate businesses operating independently of one another in that sense. So some alliances, like this sounds great if we can pull it off, right? But we all know that some alliances fail, others succeed. Why might that be? Well, a large number of strategic alliances really fail to live up to their expectations. And a lot of times they're dissolved actually rather quickly within, 1 to 2 years. And a lot of the time, some of the pitfalls that you see about why that is are seen right here, right? So when we get into alliances that are based off of tech sharing, right? We need access to some technology that another has. So let's share it between each other, right? Well, a lot of time what happens is that involves mutual learning, I would say, right? Both sides are learning something from the other. And odds are the real valuable thing is that, the firm that needed to use that tech sharing ability, they're learning a lot from this company who now provides it to them. At a certain point, one of them is going to catch up with the other, and the strategic value to the firm that initiated this type of alliance initially, it might not be as strong any longer, and therefore may not need that, and it may dissolve itself. So long-lasting alliances, they're tricky, right? They don't usually pan out in that sense. So if they're going to work out, we've got to have some sort of continued collaboration that's going to continue to be valuable to both sides, because that's absolutely necessary if we're going to enter into an alliance. It has to be a situation where both parties are getting something distinctly valuable out of putting this alliance together and continuing it, right? So a lot of times it says our failed ones are going to happen because our objectives or priorities with that other group that we've entered into alliance with have changed. All of this is a dynamic process. Now I'm going in this direction, you're going another, and maybe for a while our our outcomes were aligned. It was a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, everything's good situation. But those shifts might just mean we're going in opposite directions and we're too different of people, and we got to split up at that point. A sad reality, but it just may happen, right? So things like that may cause conflicts that become too difficult to overcome, and some of the time those alliances they have to dissolve over time because they're just not mutually advantageous for both parties any longer. Now, the other big one we want to talk about is mergers and acquisitions, or M&As, right? Mergers and acquisitions as a complementary strategy. So just specifying the difference between these two, because sometimes maybe we don't have a clear idea what is a merger versus what is an acquisition. Our mergers are just when we combine two firms and we create a single entity, and that new firm is created with a new name, much like happened with Exxon and Mobil. They decided to merge years ago and they came up with a stunningly creative new name, Exxon Mobil, right? And so as opposed to mergers, an acquisition is going to be basically when we combine two or more firms just because one of them acquires and purchases and absorbs the acquiree, right? This happened years ago when Verizon bought Vodafone and basically kicked the Vodafone brand right out of there and said, now it's just Verizon, but we've just absorbed all of their capacities, right? Well, the difference between mergers and acquisitions is in the details of ownership. So just remember that. The strict difference between these two terms comes from the details of ownership, management control, and our financial arrangements that come out of these things. So since the motivation for either of these, both of them is actually largely the same, right? The resources, capabilities, competencies, competitive capabilities, any of these kinds of things of the newly created enterprise are always largely going to be the same. It's those two companies coming into it together. So they're absorbing or merging, the capabilities, the resources of the other because it's somehow strategically valuable to them. So we could go more into these motivations behind, selecting mergers and acquisitions as a complementary strategy, but you probably noticed so far that pretty much all of these complementary strategies share common motivations, right? This is intentional. It's because they're all trying to do the same thing, just in different ways. All we're trying to do with any of these complementary strategies is we're trying to alter our future trajectory in some sort of way that improves our business outlook. That's what strategy is all about. But, it will not always go smoothly. It's not always just so simple as, like I see somebody that is a threat to me, I'm going to acquire them and use their resources and capabilities, or, hey, we could do a lot better if we team up. It's not always going to be the case. You're not always going to be met with open arms. Oftentimes, we make really big mistakes when we meld the activities of two firms, unfortunately. And sometimes we're just plain and simply wrong about the gains that we might get from, competitive capabilities that we thought we'd accomplish by merging together. Sometimes these go terribly wrong. So, our efforts to mesh the corporate cultures sometimes stall out because we have resistance from one or both sides. Somebody's not willing to give. Somebody's not willing to, change their old ways as much. They're each used to being the big dog. When we merge them together, sometimes it's like, now we're used to certain things a certain way. Well, we are too. All right, so who has the leg up here kind of situation? And sometimes it might be as simple as some of our key employees that we acquired. They might just become disenchanted with the new institution and they just decide to leave. And sometimes, those people are often a source of our competitive advantage. They could be, they hold the skills and capabilities necessary for our business to thrive. And sometimes personnel from the acquired firm, they stonewall changes or sometimes they argue forcefully for doing things the way that they're used to doing it. So a lot of times when we see failures in mergers and acquisitions, it's just because people are unwilling to change with the times and compromise with other people, which is a key element if we're going to try and use M&A as a complementary strategy. So understanding that while these do have a lot of upsides and they can be very valuable to us, it's not a given.